So, excuse me, as you can see, I'm still working on my hummingbird, and I am currently inlaying the green gold, which I had said yesterday is kind of more painful in a way, because it's so much harder. But it's actually working very well. So, as much as I wish to complain about it, I don't have any reason to do so. You look at my picture for a second. Oh, it's not the right one. Excuse me. Okay. I did not mention, but it's actually 18-karat gold, green gold. I should mention that it is actually the greenest of the gold. If you use 14 karat, it's actually not as greenish. 14 karat is more pale, let's say, more white. And it's of course harder to. And of course, it doesn't really make. Since it's very soft, you might expect that stuff will be softer, but it's not. 18 karat is even harder than 14. 14 karat is actually harder than 18. I think I did mention several times, but I'm going to mention it again, that you have to anneal goals. Usually I just use a torch. Okay, I'm going to put a little gold here, sorry, a little silver. Because I can. Details. That's what I need. And that's the other. I'm going to do the same thing there. Yeah. You know, even when you try to be realistic, don't forget that all birds are different. I mean, let me rephrase that. If you take any given animal, there is not two which are the same. And it's true for bird, of course. But it's also true for deer or going to make noise or any animal. So even if you work from picture, of course, I mean, sometimes you want to do a portrait, and when you do a portrait, it needs to be more accurate, obviously. But if you just do bird or any animal, if you do a genuine deer, your deer needs to look like a deer. But it doesn't need to look exactly like the picture you are in front of your eyes.
Guests wouldn't spend their time. It was like stepping into a different ship. All the glitter and beauty gave way to a clean utilitarian design. It wasn't as good as the Rossi, but better than any other ship Amos had worked. All the corners were curved and softened in expectation of impacts. All the handholds were double-bolted. The drawers and cabinets in the machine shop were latched in 2 planes. The air smelled like fresh filters and lubricant. Someone had kept the place clean and in better order than a glorified orbital shuttle really deserved. Amos wondered if whoever that had been was still alive. It wasn't a question he could answer, though, so he didn't spend a lot of energy on it. Peaches was sitting at a workbench. The outfit they'd gotten during their bike trip to Baltimore looked pretty sketchy in the clean and tidy surroundings. Torn at the shoulder and still too big for her. She looked like she was swimming in it. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail with a zip tie, and her hands were moving quickly and carefully over an open case of modular electronics. Her movements were as precise and flowing as an old recording of a piano player at the keys. She didn't look up as he came in, but she smiled. "Got something for you. Salvaged a hand terminal. Nice one. Even got it talking to the local network. Finish the configuration and you're good to go." Amos pulled the seat next to her out from the body of the ship. She handed him the terminal, but still didn't meet his eyes. "According to Chrissy, it ain't salvage. I liberated one then. I was going to get one myself, but I can't. I've got nothing to connect to. Could use it like a disposable," Amos said, starting to key his configuration information. "Get you access to feeds anyway. Does it matter?" "Well, if you don't think it does, then maybe not." She sighed. There were tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. "We did it. We made it safely to Luna, just like we hoped. Yeah. You know what I really missed when I was in the pit? Anything that actually meant anything. They fed me and they kept me alive, and we had this kind of support group thing where we could talk about our childhood traumas and shit. But I couldn't do anything that mattered. I couldn't work. I couldn't talk to people outside the prison. I was just being and being and being until sooner or later I'd die and they put someone else in my cell. She leaned forward. Her elbows on the workbench. She'd burned the side of her thumb on something. A soldering iron, the barrel of a gun, something. And the skin was smooth and pink and painful looking. I won't go back there. Peaches, there's no there to go back to. And anyway, I'm pretty sure Chrissy knows you're on board here. She's not pushing the issue so long as we stay cool and act casual. Her laugh was short and bitter. Then what? You can't take me with you anymore, Amos. I can't go on the Rocinante. I tried to kill Holden. I tried to kill all of you. And I did kill people. Innocent people. That's never going away. In my shop, that's just fitting in, Amos said. Well, I appreciate that seeing the crew again could leave you feeling a little antsy. But we all know what you are, what you did, including all the shit you did to us. This isn't new territory. We'll talk it through. Work something out. I'm just afraid that if he doesn't back your play, they'll send me back, and Amos lifted a hand. You're missing some shit here, Peaches. A lot of folks seem to be. Let me lay this out again. There's no back, and it ain't just the real estate. The government that put you in prison only sort of exists anymore. The planet that put you in prison is going to have billions of people die in the next decade. Making sure you serve your whole term doesn't mean shit to them. There's a new Navy between us and the ring. And there's still 1,000 souls. Systems out there to fuck up the way we fucked up this one. Because what you're doing right now, yeah, you're worrying about how it would go for you if none of that happened. And I'm thinking that you're doing it because you're not looking at the facts. What facts? It ain't like that anymore. What is it? Any of it, Amos said. With Earth puking itself to death and Mars a ghost town, everything's up for grabs. Who owns what? Who decides who owns what? How money works? Who gets to send people to prison? Eric just called it the queen of all churns, and he ain't wrong about that. It's a new game, and his hand terminal chimed. Amos looked at it. The design was nicer than his old one, but the interface was a little different. It took him a few seconds to figure out what the alert meant. He whistled between his teeth. What is it? Peaches asked. He turned the screen toward her. 70 messages and 23 connection requests, going back to before the rock dropped. Who from? Amos looked at the list. Alex, mostly. A few from the captain. Fuck. I got 6 hours of stored video with just Alex trying to talk to me. Peach's smile was thin, but it was a smile. At least you have people. Chapter 50. Alex. A bicycle? Amos leaned on the breakfast bar. Sure. They don't need fuel, they don't get sick. Most of the repairs you can handle on your own. You're looking for post-apocalyptic transportation, bikes are the way to go. Alex sipped his beer. It was a local brew from a pub just down the corridor with a rich, hoppy flavor and a reddish color. I guess I never thought about it that way. The suite on Luna was bigger than their rooms on Tycho Station had been, but of the same species. 4 bedrooms opened onto a wide, recessed common area. A wall screen bent around the curve of the room, set to an idealized lunar landscape that was more photogenic than a real one. Every now and then, an animated alien girl would pop out from behind a rock, look surprised, and dart away again. It was cute, he supposed, but he would have preferred the real moonscape. So anyway, I didn't want to go through Washington. Too many people there, and if the pump stopped working, I didn't want to be pedaling through knee-high sludge, right? Right, Alex said. Holden was on the Rocinante. Naomi was asleep in her room. She'd been sleeping a lot since the Rocinante had plucked them all out of the vacuum. The medical system said she was getting better and that the rest was good. It worried Alex, though. Not because she needed the sleep, but because maybe she didn't actually need it and was pretending to. Being here with Holden and Amos and Naomi was a bone-deep relief. He wanted it to be the end of their separation. Everything come back into its right place like nothing had ever happened. But it wasn't. Even talking to Amos, Alex thought he could feel little differences in the man. A kind of abstraction, like he was thinking of something else all the time and only pretending to give Alex his undivided attention. Naomi had been in medical debriefing since they'd arrived, and the physicians hadn't allowed anyone in to see her except Holden. If Naomi was finding excuses to stay isolated from them, that could be a very bad sign. They still didn't know all of what she'd been through, that she'd wound up with the Free Navy and then escaping from it, but that it had been a trauma seemed obvious. And so he tried to enjoy the peace and pleasure of having his crew back again, and ignore the anxiety growing in the back of his mind, the sense that, just like with the governments and planets and system of the solar system, things here had changed. Amos's hand terminal chirped. He sucked down half a glass of beer, then bared his teeth. I gotta go do a thing. All right, Alex said, pouring the rest of his beer into the sink. Where are we going? Amos hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. Doc, got something I need to move into my shop. Great, Alex said. Let's go. The stations on Luna were the oldest non-terrestrial habitation humanity had. They sprawled across the face of the moon and sank below its surface. The light set into the walls glowed with a warm yellow and splashed across vaulted ceilings. The gravity, even lighter here than on Mars or Ceres or Tycho, felt strange and pleasant, like a ship ambling on without being in a rush to get anywhere. It was almost possible to forget the tragedy, still playing out a little under 400,000 clicks over their heads. Almost, but not quite. Amos went on about everything that had happened while he was down the well, and Alex listened with half his attention. The details of the story would be grist for 100 conversations once they were back in the ship and going somewhere. It didn't matter that he get all of it now. And the familiar cadences of Amos's voice were like hearing a song he liked and hadn't listened to in a long time. At the dock, Amos looked up and down the halls until he saw someone he knew sitting on a plastic storage crate. The crate was blue, with white curls of scrapes along the side like a painting of waves. The woman was thickly built with black cornrows, dark brown skin, and an arm in a cast. Hey, Butch, Amos said. Big man, the woman said. She didn't acknowledge Alex at all. This is this. Thanks, then. The woman nodded and walked off, her low G shuffle a little stiffer than the people around her. Amos rented a loading mech, grabbed the crate, and started for the Rossi, Alex trotting along beside him. Should I ask what's in that? Alex said. Probably not, Amos said. So anyway, there we are on this island where all the rich people used to be before they fucked off up the well, right? And the ships are pretty much not there. The Rocinante had an actual hangar bay complete with atmosphere, not just a space on a pad and a tube to her airlocks. The new outer hull was titanium alloy and ceramic. The polished metal and flat black paint of the hull studded with PDCs and sensor arrays. The maw of the keel-mounted railgun was like a little surprised O at her bow. In the artificial light of the hangar, she looked less dramatic than she had in the unfiltered light of the sun, but no less beautiful. Her scars were gone now, but it didn't make the ship seem less herself. Amos drove the mech to the aft airlock and cycled it open without breaking the slow, easy lope of his story. Inside, Amos lowered the crate to the deck, but didn't turn on the electromagnetic clamps that would hold it there. Instead, he slipped out of the mech and went into the ship itself. Engineering, cargo bay, the machine shop. The stern had always been Amos's domain. "So, those others," Amos said. "Johnson's people? They're done messing with my shit now, right?" "Yeah," Alex said. "She's ours again. Just ours." "Good." Amos shuffled into the cargo bay. "So, the servants, the maids, and chauffeurs and whatever," Alex said. "They called security and then they just changed sides? Or, how did that work?" "Well," Amos said, popping the latches on the crate, "we had an introduction, see?" The folds of the crate's lid rose of their own accord. Alex jumped back, misjudged the gravity, stumbled. A dark-haired head came up over the crate's edge. A thin, ghost-pale face with ink-black eyes. Alex's heart started going triple time. Clarissa Mao, psychopath and murderer, smiled at him tentatively. "Hey," she said. Alex took a long, shuddering breath. Hey." "See?" Amos said, clapping the girl's shoulder. "Told you it wouldn't be a problem." "You have to tell him," Alex said, keeping his voice low. Bobby was telling Holden about the work she'd been doing with Veterans Affairs in Londres Nova, so he wasn't paying attention to them. "I'm gonna," Amos said. "You have to tell him now. She's on our ship." Amos shrugged. "She was on our ship for months when we were coming back from the slow zone. She was a prisoner because of all the people she killed. And now she's on our ship by herself. I'll give you that does make this situation a little different," Amos said. "Is there a problem?" Holden asked. "What are we talking about?" "Well, something I wanted to run past you," Amos said. "It'll wait until after the dog and pony show." The meeting room in the security compound was built in an outdated architectural fashion. Open archways and wide sky-blue ceilings with indirect light and subtle geometric patterning. Everything about it was pointedly artificial, like the idea of an afternoon courtyard without the afternoon or the courtyard. Avasarala's voice came before she did, staccato and impatient. When she stepped through one of the archways, a young, seriously dressed man at her side, Bobby stood up. Holden followed her lead. "If they want a voice in the decision, we're not going to fuck around bullshit electoral posturing." "Yes, ma'am," the young man said. Avasarala waved that they should sit back down as she took her own seat, even as she kept talking to her assistant. "Take it to Kleinman first. Once he's behind me, Castro and Najjar will have the cover they need." "If you say so, ma'am." "If I say so." The assistant inclined his head. "With permission, Chung is in a stronger position than Kleinman." "Are you second-guessing me, Martinez?" "Yes, ma'am." Avasarala shrugged. "Chung, then. Now go." As the young man left, she turned her attention to them. "Thank you all for... Where's Nagata?" "Medical bay," Holden said. "The doctors are still deciding whether she's stable enough to release." Avasarala hoisted an eyebrow and tapped a message onto her hand terminal. "They can make a fucking exception. I want her here. Thank most of you for coming. I'd beat around the bush and make everyone feel at home, but I've been in meetings for the last 36 hours and I'm cranky. We're all clear that Earth is fucked, yes?" "Hell yeah," Amos said. "Good," Avasarala said. "Then I won't belabor the point. Along with that, the Martian Navy just scattered into tiny little pieces, and Smith's too scared to call it treason." "Can I ask?" Bobby said, sitting forward. Her hands, splayed on the table, seemed like she was trying to brace herself against a blow. "How bad does that look?" "We're not making any official statements, especially when James Holden's in the room. No offense, but your track record for blurting information at inopportune moments is the stuff of legend. I'm getting better about that, Hogan said. But yeah, I understand. There's a thing that happens, Avasarala said, when unthinkable things become thinkable. We're in a moment of chaos. Everything's up for grabs. Legitimacy itself is up for grabs. That's where we are now. This turd biscuit Inaros, he's out tooling around the Jovian moons where we can watch him play pirate. He's made his play to set the narrative. The belt has risen up after generations of oppression and is now taking its rightful the position I'm in. He's not wrong, though, Holden said. And Avasarala's eyes hardened. If looks could kill, Holden would have left in a bag, but he shook his head. If the Belters fall in line with this Free Navy thing, it's going to be because they're all out of any other kind of hope. The new systems and colonies have erased their niche, Avasarala said. And that's shitty. And maybe we could have found a way to support them. Put them on some kind of cooperative basic. But they put a cherry bomb up the arse of the largest functioning ecosphere in the system, and it's going to be a while before handing them free food's going to be an option for me, practically or politically. They're never going to shut up and take handouts, Amos said. Those bastards are 3-4 generations out there because they weren't looking to live on basic. I'm against eugenics, same as the next guy, but the belt hasn't been breeding for the kind of people who just kick back and see how much they can fuck and watch entertainment feeds before they die. I'm aware of the cultural problem, Avasarala said, and as I said, it doesn't fucking matter anyway. If they'd be willing to take it, I still couldn't give it to them. So I have to find another way to cut the Free Navy off at the knees. But since Earth's Navy is going to be busy making sure we don't have any more radar invisible rocks dropping on us, and Mars is in the process of ignoring that it suffered a minor coup, it's going to be tricky. Tomorrow, I'm going to make an announcement. You'll get a preview. Lucky you. The United Nations, with the assistance from the Mars Republic and cooperation from the OPA, is going to field a task force to address the criminal conspiracy of pirates and terrorists going under the Free Navy name. Not a war, a policing task force. And that's where you all come into play. You want me to leave? Hogan said. Yes, Avasarala said. Because literally every UN naval officer who wasn't dishonorably discharged is suddenly unavailable. For fuck's sake, Holden, I have crates of anti-herpes drugs that are more legitimately UN Navy than you are. The old woman shook her head in disbelief and disgust. Holden's scowl was matched by a rising blush. Bobby tried to hide her laughter, but Alex had to admit it was a little funny, even if just to himself. Bobby was the one to step in. What exactly are you looking for from us? I want your presence and cooperation at the debriefing, for one thing. But more importantly, I need to know, what you found. We have to figure out how a third-rate gang leader managed to beat us at every turn. He didn't, Naomi said, stepping in from under the spreading arches, a security escort at her side. In the shadowless light, she looked weirdly delicate. Her skin was peeling, and she moved with the careful shifting of someone prepared for pain to come at any moment. But her sclera had faded from the blood and bone color to an ivory yellow that actually looked healthier, and her voice had lost the slushiness at its edges. A weight lifted from Alex's heart. The prisoner, ma'am, the security escort said. Yes, thank you, I noticed that, Avasarala said, then turned her attention to Naomi. What do you mean, he didn't? Look at everything he tried to do and failed. He didn't kill Fred Johnson. He didn't kill Prime Minister Smith. He didn't take Tycho Station or destroy it. The Rocinantes in one piece. He didn't keep hold of me. It's how he works. If he wins, it was the important thing. If he loses, it just disappears. And the protomolecule sample that he stole? Naomi blinked, seemed to lose focus for a moment, and shook her head. He never said anything about that. Would he have? Naomi sat in a chair beside Holden. He took her hand, and she allowed it, but her attention was on Avasarala. Alex wasn't sure why that bothered him so much. The meeting wasn't an invitation for the two of them to work out their relationship status. And still, if she'd been just a little less guarded with him... Yes, Naomi said. He would have. He likes to brag. The intimacy of that one piece of information filled Alex's chest with a sense of deep foreboding. Holden's face was calm, unreadable. Good, Avasarala said, a sharpness in her voice. That's very good to know. She considered Naomi silently. You look like you're feeling better. You heard some of what I was saying? Enough of it, Naomi said. Are you going to be able to help us? The question hung in the air, rich with nuance and complicated importance. Not, why were you on his ship? Not, how do you know him? Not, who are you to him that he brags about his plans to you? Just, are you going to be able to help? You okay? Amos murmured. What? I'm fine, she replied. Because you're kind of fidgeting, Amos said. At the same time, Naomi said, I want immunity from prosecution. The air seemed to go out of the room. It wasn't a confession, but it painted a picture that none of them had wanted to admit might be possible. To ask for immunity was an admission of guilt, even if they didn't know what she was guilty of. Avasarala's smile was indulgent and friendly, and he was almost certain deceptive. Blanket immunity? For all of us. Who is all of us? Avasarala said, forming the words carefully as she said them. Your friends in the Free Navy? The crew of the Rocinante, Naomi said, and then stuttered, paused. And maybe one other person. Alex shot a look at Amos. Did she know about Clarissa? Was that who she meant? Amos's smile was amiable and empty. Avasarala tapped her fingernails against the table. Not for Earth, Avasarala said. Dropping the rocks? No one gets immunity for that. Alex saw it hit. Tears appeared in Naomi's eyes, brimming silver and bright. The crew of the Rocinante, she said. The other one. I may ask for clemency and consideration later on, if the occasion arises. For Inaros? No, Naomi said. Him you can fucking burn. I need to understand this fully, Avasarala said. You, as a former member of Inaros' group, are willing to exchange complete and accurate information about his activities both before and after the bombardment of Earth in exchange for blanket immunity for the crew of the Rocinante on any matter not related to the present attacks? That there had been no profanity in the statement gave it a solidity that unnerved Alex. Yes, Naomi said. That's right. The relief on Avasarala's face was hard as flint. Glad to hear you say that, dear. I was worried I'd misjudged you. She rose to her feet, then grabbed at the table, cursing under her breath. I miss weighing something. Half the time I feel like I'm on a fucking trampoline. I'm going to go lie down and take a sleeping pill before I have a psychotic break. But the debriefing? It starts in the morning. We'll be wherever you want us to be, Holden said. We're not going to hide anything. He was still holding Naomi's hand, and her fingers had curled around his. So maybe that was hopeful after all. As to not hiding anything. Well, Amos still didn't say anything. The meeting broke up, except that it also didn't. Avasarala left, but the rest of them, including Bobby, went to the security lobby, through the checkpoint, and out to the public lobby together. The sober silence gave way slowly to more mundane conversation. Whether there was any place with food better than the mess on the Rossi, or if not better, at least different. Whether Naomi was up to drinking alcohol because there was a little pub on one of the lower levels that was supposed to have some pretty good beers on offer. No one asked whether Bobby was joining them. It was just assumed. As they shuffled and bounced in the thin gravity, Naomi and Holden kept hold of each other's hands. Amos and Bobby traded dirty jokes. It was the powerfully ordinary talk that gave Alex hope. For everything that had happened, that was happening, that was still looming in the unseen and uncertain future. There were still moments like these, and so maybe it would be all right, despite it all. At the wide slope of Chandrian Plaza, where the traffic of carts and mechs and half-skipping people turned down a wide ramp deeper into the body of the moon, Amos cleared his throat. So, that immunity for the crew thing? It wasn't just for you, Naomi said, making it a joke, and also not one. Yeah, figured, Amos said. But here's the thing. I was thinking about maybe taking on an apprentice. You know, help flesh out the crew. Get some skill redundancy. That's a good idea, Holden said. Did you have someone in mind? Chapter 51. Naomi. Hell no, Jim said when they were alone in the suite. Absolutely no. No fucking way no. There have got to be a billion different ways to say no, and I'd still have to cycle through them a couple times to really express the depth of no on this one. Clarissa Mao on the Rossi? How is that anything but a massive load of let's not do that? And yet, she said, letting herself drift down to the bed, you told Amos you'd think about it. Jim tried pacing, but the slight lunar gravity made it difficult for him. He gave up and sat at the foot of the bed. We just got the crew back together, and Bobby was there. I didn't want to spoil the moment. Ah, the moment. She closed her eyes. Everything hurt. Her skin hurt, her eyes felt gritty and swollen. The joints in her hands and feet ached. Her knees hurt. Her fingertips felt raw and oversensitive. She had the kind of headache that expressed as a sense of profound fragility until she moved too fast, and then it throbbed. It was better now than it had been, though, and it would get better. Slowly, over the course of at least days and maybe weeks, she'd come back to herself, or some version of herself. But even if some of the damage was permanent, she'd feel better than she did now. Not yet, but soon. Alex, Amos, and Bobby were gone, out to get beer and food. Their food. Pizza or falafel or sashimi. Earth food. There wasn't any good red kibble on Luna, or if there was, it wouldn't be served at the kinds of places they'd go. Part of her wished she'd had the energy to go with them. Part of her wished Jim had decided to join them instead of her. Part of her was euphoric and on the edge of tears that she was here, that she'd escaped, that it was over. She felt like her soul was a handful of dice that were still rolling, and what came up would decide the shape that the rest of her life took. I mean, Clarissa Mao? Jim said. How does anyone think that's a good idea? Amos isn't afraid of monsters, she said. The words tasted bitter, but not completely so. Oh, no, not bitter. Complex, though. She's responsible for a lot of dead people, Jim said. She blew up the Sun-Un, took out a quarter of the crew. And that one body they found, the one she was carrying around in a toolbox, do you remember that? I do. That guy was a friend of hers. She wasn't just killing faceless enemies. She was right down, looked them in the eyes, killing people that she knew, that she liked. How do you go from that to, I know, let's ship out with her? She knew she should stop him. He wasn't talking about her or the Augustin Gamara or any of the other ships that had been sabotaged since using the code she wrote. He wasn't talking about Sin or the way he tried to intervene in her half-staged suicide. If he had been, there would have been more. How could she abandon her son? How could she let Philip think that she'd killed herself? How could she have kept something that important hidden from the people that she cared about? All the sins she carried, that even Clarissa Mao didn't. She knew she should stop him, but she didn't. His voice was like tearing back scabs. It hurt to hear, and it left her exposed and raw and painful to the touch. And the pain felt good. Worse, it felt right. I'm not saying she should be killed. That whole thing about how if she's ever going back to prison, Amos is going to shoot her, I understand that he's joking. He's not. Okay, I'm pretending that he's joking. But I'm not advocating killing her. I don't want her to die. I don't even want her locked up in inhumane, shitty prisons. But that's not what we're talking about. Shipping with someone means literally trusting them with your life all the time. And okay, I was on the Canterbury and we had some people there who were deeply, deeply sketchy, but even Byers only killed her husband. Clarissa Mao set out to destroy me in particular. Me. I don't... How does anyone think this is a good idea? Someone who does the things she did doesn't just change. She took a deep breath, pulling air into her bruised lungs. They still gurgled a little, but she was on enough reflex inhibitors that she wasn't coughing herself lightheaded anymore. She didn't want to open her eyes, didn't want to talk. She opened her eyes, sat up, her back against the headboard, her arms wrapped around her knees. Holden went quiet, feeling the weight of what was about to come. Naomi plucked at her hair, pulling it over her eyes like a veil. Then, almost angrily, she smoothed it back so her eyes were clear. "So," she said, "we need to talk." "Captain to XO?" he asked carefully. She shook her head. "Naomi to Jim." The dread that bloomed in his eyes hurt to see, but she'd also been expecting it. She felt its echo in her own chest. It was strange that after all she'd done, all the demons she'd faced and escaped, this should still be so hard. Holden's hand terminal chimed, and he didn't even look at the screen. The lines around his mouth deepened the way they did when he tasted something he didn't like. His hands folded together, strong, controlled, calm. She remembered the first time they'd met, lifetimes ago, back on the Canterbury. How he'd radiated charm and certainty, and how much she'd hated it at first. How much she'd hated him for being too much like Marco. And then how much she'd come to love him for not being like him at all. And now she would break her rule of silence. And the thing they had between them would either survive or it wouldn't. It was a terrible thought. Marco might still be able to empty her, and he wouldn't even have to spend the effort of being aware of it. Existing was enough. "I don't," Jim said, then stopped. He looked up at her through his eyebrows, like he was the one feeling guilty for it all. "We all have pasts. We all have secrets. When you took off, I felt lost, confused, like part of my brain was gone. And now that you're here, I'm just profoundly happy to see you. This right here, it's enough." "Are you saying you don't want to know?" "Oh, Lord, no. No, I'd pretty much cut off the toe. I'm pretty much made of ragingly deep curiosity and floating jealousy. But I can deal with those. I don't have any more right to make you tell me anything you don't want to than I ever did. If there's anything you don't want to say..." "I don't want to say any of this," Naomi said, "but I want you to know. And so we have to get through this part, no?" Jim shifted, pulling his legs up under him, kneeling at the foot of the bed, his face to hers. His hair was the color of coffee, with just a little cream. His eyes were blue as deep water, as evening sky was supposed to be. "Then we'll get through it," he said, with a simple, boundless optimism that caught her by surprise and drew out laughter even here. "Well," she said, "when I was in my middle teens, I was living with a woman we called Tia Margolis, and burning through the engineering courses on the networks as fast as I could. And there were ships that came through dock, belter ships, hardcore." Jim nodded, and then, to her surprise, it was easy. In her mind, the idea of unpacking her past to Jim, to anyone, was a thing of anger and disgust and recriminations. Or worse, of pity. Jim, who for all his faults was sometimes capable of perfection, listened carefully and completely. She had been Marco Enaros's lover. She'd gotten pregnant young. She'd been involved, at first without knowing it, in the sabotage of inner-planet ships. She had a son named Philip, who'd been taken from her as a way to control her. She described the dark thoughts, and realized it was very nearly the first time she'd talked about them openly, without a veil of ironic humor. "I tried to kill myself, but it didn't work. Just saying the words out loud felt like being in a dream, or waking up from one. And then, somehow, in the depth of her confession, the bearing of her blighted soul that was always supposed to be a trauma and a terror, it was just her and Jim having a conversation. She'd found a way to get a message out to him during the battle, and he told her about getting it, and the conversation he'd been having with Monica Stewart, and why he'd felt betrayed by her. And then backtracked to how she'd been kidnapped, And then before that to her plan to use the protomolecule sample as a Ouija board to investigate the missing ships. And then they went back to the Chetsmoka and Marco's fallback plan, which brought up the way he always nested one scheme inside another. And before she got back around to Sin, Alex and Amos and Bobby were back, their voices burbling over each other like birdsong. Jim closed the bedroom door against them, and when he came back, settled beside her, his back to the headboard too. When she did talk about killing Sin during her jump, Jim took her hand. They were silent for a moment while she examined her grief. It was real, and it was deep. But it was also complicated with anger at her old friend and captor. She hadn't let herself be aware of that at the time. But looking back, her whole stretch on the Pella seemed like an exercise in retracting into herself. Except when she defied Marco. She remembered saying that Jim was all the things he only pretended to be. Wondered whether she should tell that part of the story, and then did. Jim looked horrified, and then laughed. They lost the track of their stories, and spent 10 minutes getting the timeline back. The Chetsmoka left the Pella after Jim and Fred had already departed from Tycho, or before. He'd told Alex to go investigate the Powcant before the rocks dropped on Earth. Oh, right. Okay, she got it now. They got sleepy together. Her arm curled in his. The pauses grew longer and softer. She thought, oh, we should really talk about Amos and Clarissa Mao. But then she was dreaming that she was on a ship that was burning at a full G for everyone else, while she was on the float. All the other people in the crew pressed to the deck while she moved through the air, reaching the tools and ducts they couldn't get to. In the dream, Alex was explaining that it was because she had so much built-up inertia that the rest of them would take a while catching up. In context, it seemed to make sense. She woke up. She didn't know how much later it was, but there were no more voices from the main room. Jim was curled on his side, his back against her. His breath was deep and slow. She stretched slowly, careful not to disturb him. The aches in her muscles and skin and joints felt a little better, and there was a warmth in her chest, a looseness. For years, she'd kept her secrets, held them like she was keeping the pin in a hand grenade. The fear and the shame and guilt had built up without her even noticing. The things she had done wrong, and there were so many, had grown in power. Not having them gnawing at her ribs from the inside felt strange, empty in a way, but a peaceful kind of empty. Not that she was suddenly made of light and happiness. Sin was still dead because of her. Philip was still abandoned. Abandoned again. Marco was still as much a pool of anger and hatred. Nothing about that had changed. And everything had. An old picture made into something new by replacing the frame. Jim shifted in his sleep. The thin, dark hairs on the back of his neck had a couple paler ones among them. The first touches of gray. Something had changed between them. Not just during her sabbatical in hell, but now that she was back from her own personal underworld. She wasn't sure exactly who they were to each other, she and Jim, except that things would be different now. Because she was different, and her changing wasn't going to break him. He wouldn't try to make her stay the Naomi he'd imagined. Things changed, and they didn't change back. But sometimes they got better. She got out of bed slowly, shuffling to the little desk in the corner of the room. Their hand terminals were there, and a little bottle of Jim's anti-cancer drugs, since he wasn't on the Rossi. She reached for her terminal, paused, and picked up his. She should ask first, but he was asleep, and she didn't want to wake him. And she didn't think he'd mind. Monica Stewart's footage of the Rabia Balki passing through the ring gate was unexceptional. Nothing in it seemed at all strange, except for the story around it. What had Marco done with it, she wondered. Why had he started his piracy so long before the actual coup that would permit it to go large scale? Just the effort of doctoring all the logs from Medina would be a risk he didn't need to take. Maybe it was something to do with the system, the bulk he was heading into? She shifted to her own terminal, connecting to the Rossi system and putting out a series of simple pattern-matching requests. It wasn't hard to do. Most of the information Stewart had been working with was public record, and optical telescopes around the system had been trained on the Free Navy since the moment Marco had started his assault on the Martian convoy. The list of systems where ships had gone missing wasn't long, but the pattern in it wasn't obvious either. She tried to remember if anyone on the Pella had talked about any of them. Tasnim, Jerusalem, New Kashmir. Of course, the naming conventions were also a mess. New Kashmir also got called Sandalphon, High Texas, and LM-422. She pulled out alternate names for the other systems. Now that Jim had learned the worst of her past, she was almost eager to start the debriefing with Abasarala's team, and if there was some clue she could bring from her time on the Pella. She scowled, ran the matching schema again with different tolerances. Behind her, Jim yawned. When he sat up, the sheets made a hushing sound. The Rossi came back with a list of possibles, and she spooled through them. The Ankara Slav was an approximate match for the Rabia Balki, but looking through the differences, she saw the drive signatures were wrong. It would have cost less to make a new ship than to swap a whole drive complex out of an existing one. In the front room, Alex said something, and Amos answered. And then, to her brief surprise, Bobby. Jim's hand touched her shoulder. "Hey, you all right?" "Yeah," Naomi said. "Fine. How long have you been up?" She checked the time and groaned. 3.5 hours. "Breakfast?" "God, yes." Her back protested when she stood, but only a little. Her mind felt focused and alive, and wholly her own for the first time in weeks. Maybe since the first toxic message from Marco had come in. She wasn't at war with herself, and it felt good. But Jim's hair was in wild disarray, but he looked handsome in it. She took his arm. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "Don't know," she said. "Would coffee improve whatever it is?" "Couldn't hurt," she said. In the main room of the suite, Amos and Bobby were talking about methods of unpowered travel, each of them subtly outdoing the other and both clearly aware of it and having fun. Alex grinned to her and Jim when they sat at the breakfast bar, and then poured them both demi-tasses of slow-pouring espresso with thick brown creme at the top. Naomi sipped, enjoying the heat and the rich complexity hidden inside the bitterness. "You're looking better," Alex said. "Feeling better, thanks. Bobby, the missing ships you were looking for, they were all MCRN, right? Navy? Ships, weapons, supplies, the whole thing," Bobby said. "I guess we know what happened to them now. No colony ships, though?" The big woman frowned. "I wasn't looking for any." "What's up?" Jim asked. Naomi swirled the espresso in her little bone-colored cup, watching the whorls form and vanish in the low gravity. "The missing ships come in 2 flavors. Military vessels from Mars that the Free Navy have now, and then colony ships that went missing on their way out to new systems. And I make 60, maybe 70% matches with the Free Navy ships to old military records. I can't find one match with the missing colony ships. I can't see a pattern in what systems they were going to or what they were carrying. And I don't know what hijacking them could have gained for Marco." Amos made a low grunting sound in the back of his throat. "Yeah," Naomi said, as if the sound had been words. "Something in the ring gates is eating ships." Epilogue. Sauveterre. "I have a tracking number," the captain of the little freight ship said for what had to be the 6th or 7th time. "I have landing papers and a tracking number straight from Amatix Pharmaceuticals. I know the shipment arrived in Medina 6 months ago. I have a tracking number." Sauveterre sipped smoked tea from a bulb as he listened. He would have preferred whiskey from a glass, but he was on duty and the barkeep was on the float. The first did for the whiskey, the second for the glass. Granted, the captain's office was private, and he could have done whatever he pleased. And he supposed he did. Keeping to his duty was a more pleasing thing for him than whiskey, which was as it should be. "Sabes, you got a tracking number, Toreador," the voice from Medina Station said. "Amatics, though. Esa es Earth Base. No Earth-based companies on Medina." The Barkeith was a Donager-class battleship, a small city in space, run with machined precision and capable of turning not only the little freighter but Medina Station to particles smaller than grains of sand. But it and the rest of Duarte's fleet were waiting for permission from traffic control in Medina to proceed through the next ring gate and begin the second, stranger leg of their journey. It was an overabundance of etiquette on the fleet's part, but there were reasons for that. Not the least being the general reluctance to use heavy weapons too near the alien station that hung inert in the vast non-space between the rings. They weren't ready for that to awaken again. Not yet. A light knock came at the door. Sabatier straightened his tunic. "Come." Lieutenant Babbage opened the door, bracing with a handhold on its frame. She looked anxious as she saluted. Sabatier let her hold the position for a moment before answering her salute and allowing her to enter. "I have been en route for 10 months, the captain of the Toreador shouted. "If the colony doesn't get this shipment, they're fucked." "Have you been listening to this?" Sabatier asked, nodding toward the speakers. "No, sir," Babbage said. Her skin was ashen under the brown. Her lips pressed thin. "Usgun, Toreador," Medina Station said. "You need to dock for medical. Wir können..." "I don't need to dock for medical. I need my fucking supplies. I have a tracking number that puts them on your station, and I will not..." Sabatier cut them off and took another sip of tea. "They've been going more or less like that for the better part of an hour. It's embarrassing on their behalf." "Yes, sir. Do you know why I wanted you to hear it?" She swallowed her fear, which was good, and her voice didn't tremble when she spoke, which was better. "To demonstrate what happens when there's a breakdown in discipline, sir. The end point of it, anyway." "Yes. I've heard you violated dress code. Is that true?" "It was a bracelet, sir. It belonged to my mother, and I thought..." Her voice trailed off. "Yes, sir. That report is true, sir." "Thank you, Lieutenant. I appreciate your candor." "Permission to speak freely, sir." Sabatier smiled. "Granted. With respect, sir, the dress code was MCRN regulation. If we are going to enumerate transgressions against code, there are some larger ones that might also be worthy of examination, sir." "You mean like being here at all?" Her expression was hard. She'd overplayed her hand, and she knew it. It happened. Embarrassment and the childish need to stamp her feet and say it wasn't fair. He wouldn't have gone there in her place. But since it was on the table, it was on the table. No way but forward. "We are in a time of flux, that's true. With the elected government failing its obligations, Admiral Duarte has taken authority and responsibility for the fleet on himself. I, following the chain of command, am carrying out his orders. You, also following the chain of command, are expected to follow mine. This is an independent initiative of the fleet. It's not a free-for-all." "Sir," she said. She meant yes, sir, but she hadn't said the yes part. "Do you know what happens if I write you up for your failure to follow fleet discipline?" "I could be demoted, sir." "You could. If things continued, you could be drummed out, removed from duty, dishonorably discharged. Not over this, of course. This is small, but if it became large, you understand?" "I do, sir." "If you were discharged, what do you think would happen?" She looked at him, confused. He gestured with his free hand, a sweep that gave her permission to speak. "I don't..." she stammered. "I don't know either," he said. "Back at Mars, you'd have been released to civilian life. But where we're going, there is no civilian life. No human life at all. Do I turn you out to fend for yourself in the local food chain? Do I spend the time and resources it would take to send you back? And then back where? The forces that have taken control on Mars would see you as a traitor, just the same as they would me. They'd throw you in the brig for life, unless you cooperated with them. And if you were going to cooperate with them, then it wouldn't make sense for me to send you back in the first place, would it?" "No, sir." He could see understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. Only beginning to, though. Humanity was so flawed. Not just her, but everyone. Half the population was below average intelligence. Half below average dedication. Average adherence to duty. The cruel law of statistics. It was astounding that as a race they managed as much as they had. Now that we are taking initiative, he said, it is more important than ever that we maintain strict discipline. We're like the first long-haul missions back before anyone had an Epstein drive. Months, maybe years, as a community of warriors and explorers. There's not room for outsiders when there is no outside. I know you're upset that... No, sir, I'm not. I know you're upset that I'm coming down on you for something as minor as a bracelet. It seems trivial, and it is. But if I wait until it's not trivial, we come to matters of life and death very, very quickly. I don't have the latitude to take a cavalier position. I understand, sir. I'm glad to hear you say that. He held out his hand, palm up. Babbage wiped away a tear with the back of her hand, and then dug in her pocket for a moment. When she put the bracelet in his hand, she paused, holding it for just a second longer. Whatever it meant to her, giving it over was a sacrifice. He closed his hand on the thin silver chain with its tiny sparrow-shaped pendant. He tried to make his smile gentle as he spoke. Dismissed. When she had closed the door behind her, he turned back to his system. A new message had come in from Cortazar. His flesh crawled a little. Duarte's pet scientist had been sending more and more messages since the Belters had pulled the trigger. The man's enthusiasm unnerved Salvaterre. The man's personality was firmly in the uncanny valley, and his pleasure in the project they were undertaking at the new Laconia station had a feeling of anticipation that was almost sexual. Duty, however, was duty. He put Babbage's jewelry in the recycler and opened the message. Cortazar was too close to the camera, or else had chosen for reasons of his own to be slightly out of focus. His wide chin and thin, black hair should have been unremarkable. Salvaterre rubbed his hands like he was trying half-consciously to wash them. Captain Salvaterre, the strange little man said, I'm pleased to report that the sample arrived intact. Thank you very much for taking custody of it after its liberation. I am, however, distressed to hear that the fleet is running behind schedule. It's a few days over the course of months, Salvaterre said to himself and the screen. We'll make it up. I know you are aware that both supplies and time are in short supply until the artifact has been brought to heel. In order to help make up for this shortfall, the research group has put together some plans and specifications for some of the modifications the Barkeep will need in order to dock with the artifact. Several of them can be started by your engineering teams en route. And of course, if you have any questions, I am at your disposal. Cortazar out. The screen flipped to a series of technical drawings. There was more than enough about those to disturb him as well. They called all the alien technology by the name protomolecule. But of course, that far-traveled set of life-hijacking microparticles was only one object in a much grander toolbox. And if Cortazar had interpreted the top clearance data from the MCRN probes correctly, what they had found would be much easier for humanity to tame and make use of. Still, the changes Cortazar wanted for the Barkeep were unpleasantly organic. Less like they were fitting a new model of airlock on the ship, and more like they were carving it into some kind of colossal prosthesis.
Okay.
It's the beginning of something very new and very powerful. And if good people don't step in to accept the power,
Now I'm going to
bad ones will. It was what Admiral Duarte had told him the night he brought Salvaterre into the fold. It had been true then, and it was true now. He switched on the camera, adjusted his hair, and began recording. Message received. I will take the plans to my engineers at once. If they have any concerns, we will be in touch. Short, to the point. Minimalist without being rude. Efficient. He hoped it would come across as efficient. He rewatched it to be sure and considered re-recording it and changing concerns to questions, but decided he was overanalyzing it. As he sent it off, his system chimed. "Captain, we have clearance from Medina." "Do we now, Mr. Kugoma?" "Kind of them." "What was the resolution of their tracking number situation?" "The freighter is moving into dock with the station, sir." Well, there was another ship for the skinnies to commandeer. If the Toreador had known which way the wind was blowing, they'd have hightailed it back to whatever hard-scrabble planet they'd come from, and tried to make do without whatever they had lost anyway. As it was, the Free Navy would just keep gobbling up the ships that came through, starving out the colonies, weakening them. By the time the Belters figured out they were fighting a rear-guard action against history, Duarte would be in position. War, Saboteur thought as he pulled himself to the command deck, had long since ceased to be about controlling territory. The job of the military was to disrupt its enemies. Generations of low-scale war in the belt hadn't been an attempt to hold Vesper Station or Ceres or any of the dozens of little floating supply hubs in the vast emptiness. It had always and only been about keeping the OPA or any other belt force from coalescing into an organized force. Until the rules changed and that organized force became useful. The Free Navy would have made itself decades before if men like Duarte had let it. Now that the belt finally had it, they would find just how useless it was. As long as it kept Earth, and what was left of Mars, busy for a few years. After that, the reward of audacity was the chance to steer history. The command deck was in trim, everyone in their couches, the displays freshly cleaned, the controls polished. The Barkeith would arrive at Laconia Station as smart and sharp as she had left Mars, and they wouldn't be wearing bracelets. He drew himself down to his command station and strapped himself in. "Mr. Taylor, sound the acceleration alert. Mr. Kugoma, inform the fleet and Medina Station that we are proceeding." "Sir," the tactical officer said, "permission to open weapon ports." "Are we expecting action, Mr. Kun?" "Not expecting, sir. An abundance of caution." Kun didn't trust the skinnies either. That was fair. They were a bunch of thugs and cowboys who thought that because they had guns, they had power. Saboteur thought it was early for the Free Navy to start double-crossing Duarte, but they were stupid and impulsive. It didn't do to assume an amateur force would make the same decisions as a professional. "Permission granted. And warm up the PDCs while you're at it. Mr. Kugoma, please advise the fleet to do likewise." "Yes, sir," Kugoma said. The klaxon sounded, and Saboteur settled into his couch, the sensation of weight returning over the course of seconds. The transit to the Laconia ring was short. The space between the rings was almost claustrophobic compared with the vastness of real, open vacuum. And dark. Stars. The physics wonk said that there wasn't any space on the other side of the rings. That whatever bubble they all existed in ended not in a barrier, but in some more profound manner that he couldn't picture. He didn't need to. The Laconia gate drew closer, a handful of stars burning solid and clear on the other side of it, and growing as they came near. The exhaust plumes of the fleet vanguard glowed brighter as they passed through. There would be new constellations there, a different angle on the galaxy, like a whole new sky. "Approaching the ring, sir," Keller said from the navigation controls. "Passing through in 3, 2... Keller fell apart. No, that wasn't right. Keller was where she had been, sitting as she had been sitting. But she was a cloud now. All of them were clouds. Saboteur held up his hands. He could see them so perfectly, the ridges of his fingertips, the spaces between the molecules, the swirl and flow of his blood beneath them. He could see the molecules in the air. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all bouncing madly against each other, obscuring some more profound space between them. A vacuum that penetrated them all. "I'm having a stroke," he thought, and then, no, something else is wrong. "Kill the drive," he shouted. "Turn about." And the waves of his words passed through the visible but invisible air in an expanding sphere, bouncing against the walls, shuddering where they intersected with the cries of fear and a blaring klaxon. It was beautiful. The cloud that was Mr. Keller moved her hands, and miraculously didn't slip through the vast emptiness of her control deck. He saw the sound coming in the rush of molecules before it reached him, and he heard the words, "What's going on? What's happening?" He couldn't see the image on the screens to know if the stars were there. All he could sense were atoms and photons of the thing itself, not the pattern they made. Someone was screaming. Then someone else. He turned and saw something move. Something else. Not another cloud like himself, like the others. Like matter. Something solid, but obscured by the emptiness of material. Like a shape in the fog. Many shapes. Neither light nor dark, but some other thing. Some third side of that coin, passing through the spaces between the spaces, rushing toward them, toward him. Salvaterre did not notice his death. This has been a Hachette audio production of Nemesis Games, Book 5 of The Expanse, written by James S.A. Corey, read by Jefferson Mays, produced by Elise Green, directed by Jay Snyder, recorded by Tommy Harron and Charles McCrory, post-production by Chris Candido. Nemesis Games is also available in print and digital formats from Orbit, a division of Hachette Book Group. For more Hachette audio productions, visit us at Hachette.
Pourquoi j'arrive pas à changer ce truc à la con?
This is Audible.
Hachette Audio presents Babylon's Ashes, Book 6 of The Expanse, written by James S.A. Corey, read by Jefferson Mays. To Matt, Hallie, and Ken, who get none of the credit and make everything possible. Prologue. Namono. The rocks had fallen 3 months ago, and Namono could see some blue in the sky again. The impact at Le Gua, first of the 3 strikes that had broken the world, had thrown so much of the Sahara into the air that she hadn't seen the moon or stars for weeks. Even the ruddy disk of the sun struggled to penetrate the filthy clouds. Ash and grit rained down on Greater Abuja until it piled up in drifts, changing her city to the same yellow-gray as the sky. Even as she'd helped the volunteer teams to clear the rubble and care for the injured, she'd understood that her racking cough and the black phlegm she spat out came from breathing in the dead. 3,500 kilometers stretched between the crater where La Gua had been and Abuja. The shockwave still had blown out windows and collapsed buildings. 200 dead in the city, the newsfeed said. 4,000 wounded. The medical clinics were swamped. If you were not in immediate distress, please stay home. The power grid degraded quickly. There was no sun to drive the solar panels, and the gritty air fouled the wind farms faster than the teams could clean them. By the time a fusion reactor was trucked north from the yards at Kinshasa, half of the city had spent 15 days in the dark. With the hydroponic houses and hospitals and government buildings taking precedence, there were still brownouts more days than not. Network access through their hand terminals was spotty and unreliable. Sometimes they were cut off from the world for days at a time. It was to be expected, she told herself, as if any of this could have been foreseen. And still, 3 months in, there came a break in the vast, blindfolded sky. As the reddened sun slid toward the west, the city lights of the moon appeared in the east, gems on a field of blue. Yes, it was tainted, dirty, incomplete, but it was blue. Nono took comfort in it as she walked. The International District was recent, historically speaking. Few of the buildings were over 100 years old. A previous generation's fondness for wide thoroughfares between thin, mazy streets and curved quasi-organic architectural forms marked the neighborhoods. Zuma Rock stood above it all, a permanent landmark. The ash and dust might streak the stone, but they could not change it. This was Nono's hometown, the place she'd grown up, and the place she'd brought her little family back to at the end of her adventures. The home of her gentle retirement. She coughed out a bitter laugh, and then she just coughed. The relief center was a van parked at the edge of a public park. It had a leafy trefoil icon on its side, the logo of the hydroponic farm. Not the UN, not even basic administration. The layers of bureaucracy had been pressed thin by the urgency of the situation. She knew she should have been grateful. Some places, vans didn't come at all. The pack of dust and ash had made a crust over the gently sloping hills where the grass had been. Here and there, jagged cracks and furrows like vast snake tracks showed where children had tried to play anyway. But no one was sliding down it now. There was only the forming queue. She took her place in it. The others that waited with her had the same empty stare. Shock and exhaustion and hunger and thirst. The International District had large Norwegian and Vietnamese enclaves, but no matter the shade of their skin or the texture of their hair, ash and misery had made a single tribe of them all. The side of the van slid open, and the queue shifted in anticipation. Another week's rations, however thin they might be. Nono felt a little stab of shame as her turn came near. She'd lived her whole life without ever needing basic. She was one of those who provided for others, not one who needed support. Except that she needed support now. She reached the front. She'd seen the man handing out the packs before. He had a wide face, brown, speckled with black freckles. He asked her address, and she gave it. A moment's fumbling later, he held out a white plastic pack to her with the practiced efficiency of an automaton, and she took it. It felt terribly light. He only made eye contact with her when she failed to move away. "I have a wife," Namono said. "A daughter." A flash of raw anger rose in his eyes, hard as a slap. "If they can make the oats grow faster or conjure rice out of thin air, then do send them to us, else you're holding us up." She felt tears welling up in her eyes, stinging them. "One to a household," the man snapped. "Move on." "But go on," he shouted, snapping his fingers at her. "There's people behind you." She stepped away and heard him mutter something obscene at her as she left. Her tears weren't thick, hardly enough to wipe away. It was only that they stung so much. She tucked her relief pack under her arm and, as soon as her eyes had recovered enough to see, put down her head and started home again. She couldn't linger. There were others, more desperate or less principled than herself. who were waiting at the corners and in the doorways for the chance to steal water filters and food from the unwary. If she didn't walk with purpose, they might mistake her for a victim. For a few blocks, her starved and exhausted mind entertained itself with fantasies of fighting off thieves, as if the catharsis of violence might somehow bring her to peace. When she'd left their rooms, she'd promised Anna that she'd stop by old Gino's on the way home and make sure the elderly man was getting to the relief van. But when she reached the turn, she kept going straight. Weariness was already sucking at her marrow, and the prospect of propping the old man up and going back through the queue with him was more than she could face. She'd say she forgot. It would almost be true. At the curve that led from the wide avenue into the residential cul-de-sac that was home, she found the violent fantasies in her mind had shifted. The men she imagined herself beating until they apologized and begged her forgiveness weren't thieves, but the freckled relief man. If they can make the oats grow faster. What was that supposed to mean, anyway? Had he been joking about using their bodies as fertilizer? Had he dared to make a threat against her family? Who in hell did he think he was? No, a voice said in her mind, as clearly as if Anna had been there to speak the words. No, he was angry because he wanted to help more, and he couldn't. Knowing that all you can give isn't enough is its own burden. That was all. Forgive him. Namona knew that she should, but she didn't. Their house was small, a half-dozen rooms pressed together like a child squeezing a handful of damp sand. Nothing quite lined up. No corner was perfectly square. It gave the space the feel of something natural, a cave or a grotto, more than something built. She paused before she opened the door, trying to clear her mind. The setting sun had fallen behind Zuma Rock, and the grit and smoke in the air showed where the wide beams of light streamed past it. It looked like the stone had a halo. And in the darkening sky, a pinpoint of light. Venus. Tonight, there might be stars. She latched onto the thought like a lifeboat in the sea. There might be stars. Inside, the house was clean. The rugs had been shaken out, the brick floor swept. The air smelled of lilac, thanks to the little sachet and candle that one of Anna's parishioners had brought them. Namona wiped away the last of her tears. She could pretend the redness in her eyes was only the outside air. Even if they didn't believe her, they could pretend to. "Hello?" she called. "Is anyone home?" Nami squeaked from the back bedroom, her bare feet slapping on the brick as she barreled toward the door. Her little girl wasn't so little anymore. She came up to Nono's armpit now, or Anna's shoulder. The gentle pudge of childhood was gone, and the awkward, coltish beauty of adolescence was clearing its throat. Her skin was barely lighter than Nono's, and her hair was as rich and kinky. But the girl had a Russian smile. "You're back." "Of course I am," Nono said. "What did we get?" Namona took the white relief package and pressed it into her daughter's hands. With a smile that was like complicity, she leaned close. "Why don't you go find out, and then come tell me?" Nami grinned back and loped off to the kitchen, as if the water recyclers and fast-grown oats were a brilliant present. The girl's enthusiasm was vast and partly sincere. The other part was to show her mothers that she was all right, that they didn't need to worry for her. So much of their strength, all their strengths, grew from trying to protect each other. She didn't know if that made it better or worse. In the bedroom, Anna lay on her cushions. A thick volume of Tolstoy rested beside her, its spine bent by being reread. War and Peace. Her complexion was grayish and drawn. Nono sat beside her carefully, putting her hand on the exposed skin of her wife's right thigh just above where her knee had been crushed. The skin didn't feel hot anymore, and it wasn't stretched drum tight. Those had to be good signs. The sky was blue today, Nono said. There may be stars out tonight. Anna smiled her Russian smile, the one her wife's genes had also given Nami. That's good then. Improvement. God knows there's room for it, Namono said, regretting the discouragement in her voice even as she spoke. She tried to soften it by taking Anna's hand. You're looking better too. No fever today, Anna said. None? Well, only a little. Many guests? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. After Anna's injury, her parishioners had made such a fuss, bringing by tokens and offers of support until it was impossible for Anna to rest. Nomono had put her foot down and sent them away. Anna had allowed it mostly, she thought, because it also kept her flock from giving away the supplies they couldn't afford to do without. Amiri came by, Anna said. Did he? And what did my cousin want? We're having a prayer circle tomorrow. Only about a dozen people. Nami helped clean the front room for it. I know I should have asked you first, but... Anna nodded at her distended, swollen leg, as if her inability to stand at the pulpit was the worst thing that had happened to her. And maybe it was. If you're strong enough, Namono said. I'm sorry. I forgive you. Again. Always. You're good to me, Nono. Then, softly, so that Nami couldn't hear them, there was an alert while you were out. Namono's heart went cold. Where's it going to hit? It won't. They got it. But... The silence carried it. But there had been another one. Another rock thrown down the gravity well toward the fragile remnants of the earth. I didn't tell Nami, Anna said, as if protecting their child from the fear was another sin that required forgiveness. It's all right, Namono said. I will if we need to. How is Gino? I forgot, floated at the back of Namono's throat, but she couldn't speak the lie. To herself, maybe, but Anna's clear eyes forbade it. I'm going there next. It's important, Anna said. I know. It's just I'm so tired. That's why it's important, Anna said. When the crisis comes, we all pull together naturally. It's easy then. It's when things drag on too long that we have to make the effort. We need to make sure everyone sees we're all in this together. Unless another rock came, and the Navy didn't catch it in time. Unless the hydroponics collapsed under the strain and they all went hungry. Unless the water recyclers failed. Unless 1,000 different things happened, any one of which meant death. But even that wouldn't be failure for Anna. Not as long as they were all good and kind to each other. If they helped carry each other gently into the grave, Anna would feel she was following her calling. Perhaps she was right. Of course, Namono said. I just wanted to bring the supplies back to you first. Nami rushed in a moment later, a water recycler in either hand. Look, another glorious week of drinking cleaned-up piss and filthy rainwater, she said with a grin. And it struck Namono for the millionth time what a perfect distillation of her mother's their daughter could be. The rest of the package was oatmeal pucks ready to be cooked, packets of something that claimed in Chinese and Hindi to be chicken stroganoff, and a handful of pills. Vitamins for all of them. Painkillers for Anna. So that was something. Namono sat with her wife, holding her hand until Anna's eyelids began to droop and her cheeks took on the softness that spoke of coming sleep. Through the window, the last of the twilight glowed red, fading to grey. Anna's body relaxed a degree. The tightness in her shoulders released. The furrows in her brow smoothed. Anna didn't complain, but the pain of her injury and the stress of being suddenly crippled had mixed with the fear they all shared. It was a pleasure to watch it all fall away, if only for a moment. Anna was always a handsome woman, but when she slept, she was beautiful. Nona waited until her wife's breath was deep and regular before she rose from the bedside. She was almost to the door when Anna spoke, her voice rusty with sleep. "Don't forget Gina." "Going there now," Nona said softly, and Anna's breath went back to its deep, sleep-slow tide. "Can I come too?" Nami asked as Nona went back to their street door. "The terminals are down again and there's nothing to do here." Nona considered, "It's too dangerous out there, and your mother might need you." But her daughter's eyes were so hopeful. "Yes, but put your shoes on." The walk back to Gino's was a dance in the shadows. Enough sunlight had struck the emergency light solar panels that half the houses they passed were glowing a little from within. Not much more than a candle's brightness, but more than there had been. The city itself was still black. No streetlights, no glow in the skyscrapers, and only a few bright points along the sinuous length of the arcology to the south. Namono had the sudden, powerful memory of being younger than her own daughter was now, and going up to Luna for the first time. The utter brilliance of the stars, and the starkly beautiful Milky Way. Even with the dust grit still in the high air above them, there were more stars out now than when the light pollution of the city had drowned them. The moon shone, a crescent of silver cupping a webwork of gold. She took her daughter's hand. The girl's fingers seemed so thick, so solid compared to what they had once been. She was growing up, not their little baby anymore. There had been so many plans for her university and traveling together. All of them gone now. The world they thought they were raising her in had vanished. She felt a twinge of guilt about that, as if there was something that she could have done to stop all this from happening, as if it were somehow her fault. In the deepening darkness, there were voices, though not so many as there had been. Before, there had been some nightlife in the quarter. Pubs and street performers and the hard, rattling music recently come into fashion that clattered out into the street like someone spilling bricks. Now, people slept when the darkness came and rose with the light. She caught the smell of something cooking. Strange how even boiled oats could come to mean comfort. She hoped that old Gino had gone to the van, or that one of Anna's parishioners had gone for him. Otherwise, Anna would insist that he take part of their supplies, and Namono would let her. But it hadn't happened yet. No need to call for trouble before it came. There was enough on the road already. When they reached the turn to old Gino's street, the last of the sunlight was gone. The only sign that Zuma Rock was even there was a deeper darkness, rising up thousands of meters above the city. The land itself raising a defiant fist to the sky. "Oh," Nami said. Not even a word so much as the intake of breath. "Did you see it?" "See what?" Namono asked. "Shooting star. There's another one. Look." And yes, there among the fixed, if flickering stars, a brief streak of light. And then another. While they stood there, hand in hand, a half-dozen more. It was all she could do not to turn back, not to push her daughter into the shelter of a doorway and try to cover her. There had been an alert, but the remnants of the UN Navy had caught this one. These smears of fire across the upper atmosphere might not even be the debris from it. Or they might. Either way, shooting stars had been something beautiful once, something innocent. They would not be again. Not for her. Not for anyone on Earth. Every bright smear was a whisper of death, the hiss of a bullet, a reminder as clear as a voice. All of this can end, and you cannot stop it. Another streak, bright as a torch, that bloomed out into a silent fireball as wide as her thumbnail. That was a big one, Nami said. No, Namono thought. No, it wasn't.
Okay, so that's
Chapter
the way
1.
it looked like
Pa.
at this point.
You have no fucking right to this, the owner of the hornblower shouted, not for the first time.
Hopefully it will look
We worked for what we have.
better.
It's ours. We've been over this, sir, Michio
I am
Pa,
going
captain
to
of
a
the Comet,
dinner
said.
now.
Your ship and its cargo are under conscript order of the Free Navy.
I will come back in a few hours. No, maybe not in a few hours, but in some time. Bye for now.